Hey, Scott Jordan and Mark Warner here for Jancast number 137, Thursday, December 8th. And we're getting close to the holiday season. Well, it is kind of the holiday season, right? But what's going on your end, Mark?
Well, I got an email that said happy Chris Hanukkah because they're coinciding this year, which makes it
Yeah,
like all in one. That's kind of cool.
it's like the
But
planets
the
aligning.
big news that's out there, Scott, is I just can't help not talk about it. Is the triple demic, and that's a term that we never even had.
I've
Like
never heard that before until
but
right now. Triple demic, huh? Is that a
triple
real
demic.
word?
Well, we've got the seasonal flu.
Right.
People are getting vaccinated to try to avoid the seasonal flu. We've been fighting for 2.5 years COVID-19 as a viral flu, completely different than the seasonal flus. And obviously, one of the biggest concerns right now is respiratory syncytial virus, which is RSV, and it's attacking kids. So
Yeah.
right now, especially for people with families, they're staring down down the barrel at like three things that are really heavy in the news.
Yeah.
And so since that's being talked about so much, you and I've been very sensitive to what we're seeing pop up in the news, right?
Yeah, yeah, and monkeypox. I think they've determined that that's no longer as big of an issue as it was before.
Well, it's on a decline,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
that means that all the actions people are taking to mitigate it are working.
yeah, yeah. But the really hot news is, we go back in time. Let's just take a little trip down memory lane. Do you remember back in the day when the whole COVID thing started and everybody was like saying, I got a product that you spray it all over your body, gets rid of COVID. And we called in it. And then there's other ones after that. And I remember there was a company in Texas that was selling, stop by in your car, bring your bottle of disinfectant in. They refill your bottles on the spot, which is highly illegal, by the way, with some product that had some COVID claims that were not real, blah, blah, blah. But the most substantial ones that we really got upset about was Southwest Airlines, I think, was the first, and then United and American. The American one's a little bit different. We'll talk about that. But so this is August of 2020. And I think we said back at the time, boy, we'd really like to hire that salesperson that sold these companies these bill of goods. But actually, we don't want that kind of salesperson working for us. But remember what they were saying back then, Mark? I mean, it was crazy.
It was they were allowing the consumer, and I think Southwest, United, and American to do an incorrect leap of logic. So, back in the day, we've had for the last decade or so products that are have a long-term resistance to things like odor-causing bacteria.
Right.
It's been used in garments. It's been used in the marine industry, on fabric used on boats. It's been used by the restoration industry. But it's not making a claim against disease-causing bacteria.
Except these were.
Well, but no, not actually.
Yeah.
So when you think about it, none of the claims over the last decade were making claims against viruses. They were only making claims against odor-causing bacteria.
Right.
So the leap of logic that they were trying to convince people to believe is that because it works on odor-causing bacteria, it's going to make you safe from COVID or the flu or RSV. All of those are viruses. And so they were trying to infer an antiviral claim on products that were not made at all or even tested to go after viruses that cause disease. In fact, they were allowing, it's one of those things where your kids come home and tell you a story, but they leave out certain facts. And so you're like, oh, glad you had a great time. But the fact they left out is that they got a flat tire and hit a pole. And, so in this case, I think the companies that were making the certain claims to Southwest were leaving out facts like, yeah, we can kill bacteria on surfaces. They were leaving out the fact that they were odor-causing bacteria, not disease-causing, and had nothing to do with being antiviral, so it had nothing to do to make those planes safe.
Well, no, they made it. They made a significant jump from it's killing stuff that it wasn't approved for. And then on top of that, it has residual activity against that stuff that they weren't even approved for. And then the worst part, good for us in germwashing.com at the time, and one of the reasons we established that whole website is to ferret out the truth on this. Unfortunately, people like Southwest or whoever approved these products being used didn't actually read the label. The labels said, like you just said, it's only effective against odor-causing bacteria. So they're making claims that were not even on their label. So we'll put a link in the show notes. Back on 8/27/2020, the title of our show was Spears and Spikes, Oh My, because all these products back then were selling it on the basis of these spears, and the bacteria would fall down from the sky and fall onto the spears and
get impaled.
Impale them and kill them. And it was like, wow, what a dramatic thing. But it was all bogus. So we called them out.
The good news on it, Scott, is that those 3 airlines listened to you.
Well, not me, germwashing.com. But
yes, but you were the most vocal. I was there at your side, but you were the most vocal, and they ultimately pulled those ads.
Yes, they did. Yep. And I think we talked a couple of shows ago about one of the people one of the Spears and Spikes companies getting fined $300,000. So maybe it caught up with them. But the really good news that we heard through the grapevine, and then we did all this research over the last week or so, is EPA has actually established protocol for establishing residual claims, which is pretty exciting and not an easy process for sure.
And those residual claims are going to be aimed at disease-causing bacteria and, for the first time ever, disease-causing viruses.
Yep.
So these testing protocols that they're going to go through may actually end up providing a pathway to a new product offering that could quite literally do that. But you brought this up when we were talking earlier, Scott. The whoever gets through this series of tests, they're going to have something rather significant to talk about.
Yep. Not going to be anything that's happening real soon, because the testing is going to be the testing is extremely thorough. So we can kind of get into that. So there's three different residual sections of this. There's residual disinfectant claims, which, that's nice, but we're really more concerned about the viruses. And the residual disinfectant claims are specifically against Staphylococcus aureus and Pseudomonas aeruginosus. And aren't you impressed that those things just roll off?
Just rolled right out.
Who would have thought when I was going to art school that I would be able to say Pseudomonas aeruginosus? So sorry, back to the claim.
I have no response to that.
So it's residual disinfectant claims and residual virucidal claims, which is the more important one that you talked about. And then there's ones that have kind of been around for a while before, which is paints and the stuff they add to the buckets and things like that. Those are not really that significant. The two big ones are the virucidal and the disinfectant claims. Yeah. So you want to run through and we'll put links in the show notes about where you can read these. I have two of the documents. This one's 18 pages long. The protocol one, guidance for products adding residual efficacy claims, 22 pages long from the EPA. So we're just pulling stuff out, but I know the people that listen to Jancast are really interested in this stuff, and it's good to be able to speak intelligently about it to your customers or your suppliers or whatever. So go into some of the details on the test method.
So the test method is really rigid and very impressive that they're being as rigid, right? Yeah. So finally, there's some truth coming out. One of the things that before I talk about each of the steps, one of the things that jumped out at me was their terminology. And obviously these documents that you talked about, they're on the EPA website.
Yeah.
But they're calling this residual self-sanitizing. And that sends a red flag up generally for me, like, what do you mean self-sanitizing, right? So is that inferring that, yeah, you don't have to worry about your socks smelling, or is that saying that you're sanitizing to where you won't get sick, right? That's been that big issue. But what they do is they're literally doing these tests with a 5% blood serum in a petri dish in a lab. And, again, I think when I go through these steps, we can have a conversation about, is that realistic? Doing a 5% blood serum in a petri dish in a lab.
They do have some different surfaces spelled out in the
Yep.
in the test data.
So what they're doing is they're doing it over like a 2-day period. Technically, day one, they're inoculating that surface with the test organism, which ultimately we're looking to see this have a virus or a virus claim. So ultimately, the test organism might be SARS-CoV-2, or it might be RSV, because that's what everybody's concerned about, or even the Ebola virus, right? And then so they're going to inoculate the surface with that test organism, and then they're going to apply the test product. And then they run through something called a wear cycle. So they're trying to find out whether this is abrasion resistant or not. And it's literally a unit that just kind of
it was explained to us kind of, it's like a swing.
Pendulum. Yeah, like a
pendulum hitting the bottom.
So they're doing that like dry, and then they're doing that with a moist cloth, and then they're going back to doing that dry, and they're repeatedly doing that, trying to make sure this doesn't just come right back off, because it would be an irrelevant claim. And then they're going into day two, where they're literally continuing this whole process. They're re-inoculating with a test organism on day 2, running through this abrasion test again. And all this is done, Scott, until like 12 wear cycles are completed. And then they test it to see whether or not it can make the claim of a 99.9 or greater efficacy on the elimination of those viruses or bacteria. But disease causing, which is literally the issue. And so I've had a lot of people, and you have too, that have kind of brought up like, there's been stuff around for years like that, you paint on the bottom of boats, or that's been integrated into a mop bucket, and, the thing is that, again, that brings up that mass confusion about whether or not they're really effective against disease-causing viruses. That's our big thing. And
something that you need to worry about.
Is it odor-causing bacteria? Big difference. Like, you're not dying from an odor-causing bacteria. You just have stinky socks. But, but some of these other things, are lethal. And so that's why you and I have always taken such a strong stance about clarification of this, because maybe we take it too seriously, but we believe there's lives at stake here. And this misinformation can harm people.
Well, that's why we started up the germ washing, because there was so much fake stuff out there that we thought, well, it'd be a good idea to have. Fortunately, it's calmed down a bit, but back in the day, in 2020, it was crazy with the claims that are running out there. So that's just so we're clear. The data says, okay, per the interim residual self-sanitizing method, durability testing should include 12 wear cycles consisting of this wet and dry. But the ultimate goal is to support a 24-hour residual claim. So they're not actually going any further than 24 hours. So that's good, because some of the Southwest and some of those other ones were saying it was going to have a residual activity for a month. If I remember right. Crazy stuff. But
and the residual activity that they may have been documenting to support their claim had nothing to do with disease-causing microorganisms. It might have been odor-causing microorganisms that they could prove that on, and but they were allowing people to make a leap of logic that wasn't valid by leaving factors out of the statement. And then, the other thing that when this does all happen, Scott, and I believe, we as humankind, we're a pretty innovative species, so I believe that, I think there will be a residual that'll come along at some point. But, the question is, is it valid to make a claim? Is a 24-hour window? Is that a deal breaker? I mean, is it a deal maker? I mean, the 24-hour window, we've got a lot of people that are doing repeated applications of disinfectant throughout the course of a single day.
Yeah.
Just
Yep.
and what this brings up to me is things like, high touch surfaces. I mean, a high touch surface could get touched 100 times a day.
Yeah. It's not going to be easy.
No. And so you start to wonder about that. And when I think about high touch surfaces, what I think about is that the human being itself, ourselves, are actually the contaminant. We carry it on our hands. We carry it on the soles of our shoes. We expel it through sneezing and coughing. And so, one of the things I worry about the most is like people having the belief that if I bleed onto this surface or I sneeze and cough onto this surface, is something on that surface going to actually reach up and kill that liquid that's sitting there?
That's what they're saying.
And I'm very leery on believing that that's the case,
Right.
because the amount of contamination that could be put onto a surface that was treated could exceed the capability of whatever's on that surface of reaching up and killing it. Like,
right.
So part of that is the big questions I have. And if we put it into the real world, Scott, you and I talk about bathroom cleaning all the time. It's just part of our world. But if there's urine on the seat of a toilet that's been treated with this in the last 12 hours, does it mean it's safe to sit on it?
Yeah.
Well, not positive that I buy into that.
Yeah. Well, we got some feedback from some people that you talked to about the testing doesn't appear to take into account soil load.
Yeah. The resoiling. Which is kind of resoiling.
Yeah, I mean, that's always been a confusing thing. Just even before COVID, people didn't understand that, most of the disinfectants are approved for use where there isn't any soil or the surfaces have been pre-cleaned.
Right.
I mean, that's still a mystery to people as to why do we have to pre-clean? It's like because the products are tested maybe with some form of soil load, but not a heavy soil load.
Right.
It's usually 4% blood serum or something like that, right? But yeah, if you're not testing against stuff with the proper soil load, you don't even know if it's working or not. So yeah.
And then there's another piece of that came up in some of the conversations I've had with some folks about this.
Yep.
Based on being involved with several standards committees. And that was the question, like, what if this causes rapid resoiling? We've always known that that residues left on the surface of carpeting, for example, causes resoiling at the rate that's 10 times faster than a clean piece of carpet, right? So, and we know that residues left behind by traditional disinfectants can cause a rapid level of resoiling because it's a sticky, tacky film that might attract soil and a food source to allow bacteria to colonize, right? So, one of the tests that hasn't been discussed is whether or not there's going to be a rapid resoiling question that comes to mind on this. Yeah. So I think that's another level that germwashing.com might actually be reaching into. Okay, we've got a product that makes this claim, but in the real world where there's people going in and out of aircraft, sitting in seats over and over again throughout the course of a day, or reusing a bathroom over and over through the course of a day, what does the test results show in that kind of heavy use? So, and one of the other questions, Scott, that came up was, whether or not leaving a film of any kind supports the development of things like biofilms. And we've talked about biofilms in previous things, so we're leaving a structure there that might allow that to happen. So I believe that this testing is fantastic to hear about. I respect the EPA greatly. So does the whole world, for that matter. There's a lot of countries throughout the globe that rely on EPA testing to validate products.
If it's approved by EPA, like over in the Middle East and stuff, we've never had any trouble shipping disinfectants over there because they consider EPA the golden source for that kind of data.
Sure. I've had a lot of interaction with folks in Canada who also will very often reference EPA guidelines. Even though they have their own certification process, it's still recognized as being one of the stricter and more valid
Yeah.
of any guideline. So I respect it a lot, and I think what'll happen down the road is folks like you and me, Scott, will start questioning the next step. Okay,
Yeah.
we got something that can make this claim. Let's see how this works in a real world environment where there is fresh contamination and high soil loads being redeposited.
Yeah.
And let's make sure that it's not enhancing future growth.
Well, the really good news is we had a discussion with a company, and won't say who, last week. And one of the questions we posed was, can you actually make a product that you think will pass all of these protocols? And they sounded like they thought it. Now, obviously, they have to weigh the cost involved. But the first thing I'm sure on the lab end is like, do you think we can actually pass all these protocols? And the answer is apparently they think they can. The residue thing's important, obviously. And this testing, by the way, only applies to non-food contact hard surfaces. It does not have anything to do with soft surfaces. So the whole airplane thing was spraying the seats. Forget it.
Right.
This isn't going to have any residual
on cloth or textile.
On cloth or textiles, yeah, because that's too hard of a surface to establish protocol for. But
I have to say that I came away from that call equally impressed.
Yeah.
We were speaking with PhDs
Yeah.
and people that I fully respect as being much smarter than me.
Yep.
So the fact that they believe that this is possible, that was a ray of hope. Like maybe one of the best pieces of good news we've had in 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Of COVID, right? So that's kind of neat to see and hear, and just stay tuned, and we'll keep you abreast of how this develops.
Who knows? Just like we're talking about 2020 now and all the crazy stuff that was going on, maybe a year from now we'll be saying, you remember back in December of 2022, we started talking about the protocols, and look, we now have a product that has residual claims against stuff we really care about.
Yeah, and that'll be about the time that dilithium crystals will come about too.
I got some of those in my car right now.
Well, listen, I'm very hopeful, very, very hopeful.
Been a great discussion, and I think our audience will appreciate the fact, we're always kind of cutting edge and bringing this kind of info out there, so that when you the listener hears about it, you can say, I heard about that on Jancast.com back in December, just like they heard about the fact that we were publicizing all these false claims back in 2020.
Well, sometimes I think our goal isn't necessarily to say that we know all the answers, but I think sometimes our goal is just to pose the right questions.
Yep.
Having experience in this field, like there are questions that people should be asking, and I think that's one of our strongest roles in the whole thing. But
well,
really enjoyed the Jancast today.
Yep. On that note, perfect way to end. Haven't decided what we're going to do for our next show, which is very close to Christmas, so stay tuned. We might do a best of, but we'll keep you on the edge of your podcasting seats, as they say. Okay, see y'all.
See you,
Thanks
everybody.
a lot for tuning in.
Thank you.